You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, here with Brother James Mann. Welcome back, James.
Thanks for having me again, Jack. It's been a while, so I'm happy.
Has been too long, too long. Our favourite apprentice here in Victoria, and our listeners have been hearing your voice. I actually travelled up to Sydney last week, or a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, "Where's James?" Because they actually knew your voice. They knew my voice, funny enough.
Okay.
It's a bit weird when you're travelling about and people meet you for the first time having only heard your voice and like, "Hey, you're that guy." I'm like, "Oh, no." So well, it's good to have you back on, James. We have one of what I would believe to be one of the most fascinating topics today. One of the first things you would have realised when you applied for Freemasonry is it's a male-only organisation. And one of the big elephants in the room, especially when you talk to non-Masons, is what's this issue with women? So I thought maybe as someone who's been newly initiated, were you aware of that when you joined, or is that something that you considered?
No, it wasn't something that I was definitely 100% sure certain. Like, if I had got to the interview with Grand Lodge and they said that there was women there, I wouldn't have known any different, no. Okay, and when you did find out, was it something you had a problem with? Well, I didn't, to be honest, I thought it was something that men just chose to do, and women, it wasn't something they wanted to do. I didn't think it was something that actually, women weren't allowed to do. Yep, yeah. But now that you know that they're not allowed to do it, you're fine with that? You don't have an issue with that? No, I don't so much have an issue with it. No. Very interesting. No, I'm much the same. I think that there's a great role for fraternities, but we're going to be having a fascinating conversation today with two members of Droit Humain, or the International Order of Freemasons for Men and Women. It's an irregular order in the sense that it's not recognised by the United Grand Lodge of England or the United Grand Lodge of Victoria. And it's what sometimes you'll hear called clandestine Freemasonry. Freemasonry is not regular or recognised. That doesn't mean that it's any less legitimate or anything like that. It just means that we don't recognise it. And there's certain rules about our capacity to recognise them and to participate in their practices. Basically, we can't. But we'll get into that in the interview. So just before we get into that interview, I just want to sort of give everyone an update of some news. We did travel to New South Wales, as you're all aware. Last time we spoke with you a couple of weeks ago, we did indicate that we're seeing Luke Spickler. I just want to once again thank Luke and Lodge Thespian for the very generous hosting that they gave us when we were up there, Brother Steve and I. But I also want to specifically mention the senior warden at Thespian Lodge, Patrick Spicer. What a fantastic support he's been for this podcast and for us. He's coming back down to Melbourne in October, so you get to catch up with him, James. It'd be good for you to meet him. And just so our Sydney listeners are aware, we are heading back up to Sydney for Lodge Galileo's installation on the 15th of October, which will be at the Egyptian Room as well. If you want some more details, email us on contact@blue.fmvic.com. In other news, Brother Wayne Greenlee, he's a contributor for the Midnight Freemasons blog, and also on the team for our other friend, Rob Johnson's podcast, Whence Came You. I'm sure you've all heard of Whence Came You. Wayne Greenlee supports that podcast, and he's a writer for the Midnight Freemasons blog. He came down to Melbourne, and Brother Steve and I met him at Lodge Altona, and we had a great evening. And I just want to say to Brother Wayne, it was fantastic seeing you here in Melbourne, and we look forward to getting back up to Queensland to visit yourself, and hopefully over to Illinois so we can see Brother Robert Johnson and give him a tap on the shoulder and tell him that Australian Freemasons are pretty active when it comes to travelling. So that would be pretty good. Aside from that, I just wanted to sort of set up the interview that we're about to have, James. So from your understanding, what do you know about the rules? Is it just that we don't admit Freemasons that are women, or are you aware of this? Are you aware of some of the stuff that we're not allowed to do and what happens if we do it? I'm aware that you'd be breaching your obligation, so you'd most likely be expelled from Freemasonry.
Yep, or disciplinary action could be taken. Yeah, so that's something that we want to make clear from the outset. Yeah, bigger
than that though, like even bigger than being expelled. Say you were expelled. I think for your own personal, just for your personal self, it's a test of character.
Yeah.
If you're not someone who can stick to your obligation, then you're probably not welcome to Freemasonry. Yeah, so it's obviously something people need to think about. Exactly right. And this is something we want to make clear from the start, because we have Illustrious sister, her name is Anney Konis, and also Right Worshipful Brother Alan Garner, who are both members of this irregular lodge, or Droit Humain. And I just want to make clear that during our conversations, we are not here to promote
co-masonry or to promote anyone in particular. We're here to talk about what some of the different organisations in our fraternity do, how they exist, how they interact, and as a provider of Masonic education, we think that our listeners will get a lot out of learning about that. And I'm sure it'll be very valuable and very interesting. The views expressed in the interview that we're about to do are our views, personal views. They don't represent the United Grand Lodge of Victoria or any Grand Lodge. And the same goes for Right Worshipful Brother Alan and Illustrious Sister Anney. They don't represent their own organisation. The views they express are purely their own. But we hope our listeners will get a lot out of it. And without further ado, we'll start our interview with Right Worshipful Brother Alan Garner and Illustrious Sister Anney Konis, of members of the International Order of Freemasons for Men and Women. I'd like to welcome Illustrious Sister Anney Konis and Right Worshipful Brother Alan Garner. And they belong to, and I'm going to butcher this name, I apologise, the Droit Humain, which is in layman's term, a co-masonry body here in Australia. And they've agreed kindly to come out and do an interview with us to talk about the big elephant in the room. Why doesn't the United Grand Lodge of Victoria or any other grand body across Australia and the world that's recognised by the United Grand Lodge of England let women into the organisation? What are we doing, and why do we do it? And I thought the best way we could get this, James, is by having a situation where we get people from the order along and to ask them questions and to get some perspective. So welcome to you both, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack, for having us.
That's good. Let's get straight into it. I think our listeners are probably hungry to know, how did this happen? Like, not in a bad way, but how did you guys stumble across this order, and what's your life journey? Because I think that's something that'd be really interesting. I know a little bit about yours, Alan, because we've spoken through email, but Anney, I've only met you today, so it'd be very interesting to hear your story. So maybe we'll take it in turn. We'll go with Alan first. Tell us your story. How did you get to this point?
Okay, Jack. Well, I joined Freemasonry in 2008, fairly late coming to Freemasonry. I was brought up Catholic, and there's obviously the Catholic Freemasonry antagonism there, so it wasn't part of my family's history. And I was in New South Wales at the time, and I joined a lodge of the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales and the ACT.
So you're a member of a regular Grand Lodge?
That's right,
okay. Right,
yes. Yeah. And went through the 3 degrees in New South Wales. My reason for joining, it was a result of the post-9/11 world, where I was seeing just the conflict with people through ideologies, and I just wanted to I'm a spiritual person, and I wanted to sit down as a brother with people of different faiths. And so I joined Freemasonry and met some very good men in my lodge, but I was looking around thinking, what Freemasonry teaches me is they're universal truths that apply to all human beings, and I just felt an imbalance in the lodge for me. And so I thought, I moved back to Victoria, which is my home state, and instead of joining the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, I sought out co-Freemasonry, or le Droit Humain, because I knew about it. For a friend of mine in Wales, she told me many years ago that she was a co-Freemason. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to hunt that down. And I'm pleased I did, because I find that we've got the potential for balance, having men and women working the Masonic rites together.
So basically, you came to Victoria and you felt this sense of a gap, by the sounds of it, in your experience, and you felt that the principles that are taught by all forms of Freemasonry are universal, so it prompted you to join, obviously, a co-masonry body, because it obviously filled that gap, or it's tried to fill that gap.
That's right, yes.
It's very interesting. Okay, and you've been a member for how long?
I joined the International Order of Freemasonry for Men and Women, le Droit Humain, which is our full title. I joined St John's Lodge in Richmond in 2012. And because our order recognises Grand Lodges, I had the option of, I didn't have to do the 3 degrees again. I was already a Master Mason, and that was fully recognised. I elected to go through the 3 degrees again, and I'm glad I did, because the rituals, they're the same, but they're slightly different. And to see that nuance of difference in the ritual just added that, gave me the full experience of being a part of the order that I'm in. And so I'm sort of unique that I've actually been through the 3 degrees twice.
So you got that experience, which is absolutely incredible. Okay, well, thank you for that, Alan. Tell me, female Freemason, a lot of listeners will be scratching their head saying, wow, how does that work?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Even my family is still scratching their
They're
heads.
still scratching their Tell us your journey.
Well, I joined in 1997, and I joined out of curiosity, to tell you the truth. I've been on the spiritual path for a long time. And a very dear friend of mine was very keen to join Freemasonry. She was one of those people that was annoyed at the fact that women couldn't join Grand Lodge. And we found co-Freemasonry. So my initial experience was that of curiosity to see what was Freemasonry all about. And like Alan, I have no history of Freemasonry in the family. I'm traditionally from a Greek Orthodox background. And again, as I said earlier, my family is still scratching their heads as to why, especially my husband, as to why I joined such an organisation. But it is a deeply personal one, and I haven't regretted it. I mean, it was an easy decision at the time. I love the rituals. As I said, it's been nearly 19 years, almost 20 years now, since I've been in the order.
And clearly the journey's resonated with you too.
It has, and with all spiritual journeys, you do have these blocks that come up, and you question, why am I here? And it has come up several times for me, and along the journey, and especially in the beginning when there was a lot of resistance from family members, and I had to navigate external resistance and really justify it within my own heart. Why? Because I didn't want to do it just out of being resistant. It had to be true, and I haven't been disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, it's funny because your journey sounds similar to mine. I joined Freemasonry by accident. You know, it was just one of those situations that just happened, and I've got no family who are members. And like you said, it's a profoundly personal journey, and it's immensely spiritual. We dedicated a whole episode to arguing why Freemasonry isn't a religion, why it's a spiritual journey. And it's fascinating to see that even, obviously for yourself, it was something that's had a huge impact. And considering the fact that you've had, obviously, some family opposition, and then on top of that you've joined what would be considered to be a fringe or a smaller group, you've obviously had to really dedicate your interest into that, and you've taken that conviction, and clearly it's paid off because you seem to have really enjoyed it.
Well, I do. I still enjoy it, and it is a deeply personal journey, and you come up against yourself time and time again. And as you know, the first degree, which I always come back to the first degree, you know, we're all rough, ashless, you know, trying to smooth, you know, those extra, and we can only do that by rubbing up against each other.
Exactly,
you can't do that on our own.
No, you need friction, and you need other people around you. And one of the lessons of the third degree is to know thyself. And I guess this is the journey. This is the real goal of what we do, to know thyself, which is a very interesting question. Well, thank you very much for sharing that, and it's the same to you, Ellen. It's very good to sort of. It's interesting the parallels between the journeys of just normal, you say, Grand Lodge Freemasons and everyone else. And I hope our listeners dispels that belief that as we take this path to enlightenment, which is what it is, you can take it in many different ways. So let's talk a bit about the order that you belong to, your respective roles in that order. I know, Anney, you've got one. Tell us about the structure, its histories. Give our listeners an idea of what the order is and where it comes from, because it's not something that's been concocted in the last 10 years, for example. It's
definitely not. It's an international order. I think it's established in over 72 countries around the world. The headquarters are in Paris, where our Supreme Council sits, which is the highest classification of 33rd degree Masons that sit and decide and make all the big decisions for everyone around the world. It started back in the early 1900s or late 1800s.
1892?
Yes, where male members from the British Federation initiated a female member.
Maria Durand.
Yes, that's correct. And that's when it started. So I think there were male members that probably had the same thoughts on what is equality in this universal teachings of Freemasonry. And when they started that new order in France, it's taken off from there. So that's a brief history.
No, that's
it's not
fine.
a full history of the order. The structure is that, as I said, there's a Supreme Council that sits in Paris. Each orient or each federation, and it depends on how many members there are, if it's called a federation. Australia still is called a federation, and there's various other smaller lodges around the world. There's in the US, in Europe it's quite big.
Yeah.
They've got really large memberships, from Greece, from Germany, Belgium, France, I think most of the European, the EU countries, Spain, Portugal, South Africa, England, just to name a few of the lodges, and some of them are in the South Pacific as well, and in South America.
And in Australia, we've been here for over 100 years.
Yeah, because you've got a strong foundation here. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and because I think the United Grand Lodge of Victoria celebrates its 125th birthday in 2014. So obviously there's not much of a difference between at least the age of the organisations here in Australia, which is fascinating. Because obviously people they hear these things, they think, how do these things come about and when do they come about? Obviously you've got a strong rooted history here in Australia, in Victoria at the very least, in Australia. But you're an international order. You've got your provinces, and Australia's obviously a federated province of that. You've got your lodges in each state. How many members would you have in Victoria?
Currently in Victoria there are 3 lodges, 2 in Melbourne that both meet in the same temple, and 1 in Daylesford. Around 60 to 70 members currently registered for the Victorian lodges.
And do you get a high proportion of attendance out of that 60, 70 members, or is there an issue? Because just so you know what we're experiencing here in Victoria United Grand Lodge of Victoria, I think we're under 10,000 members now. We're about, probably maybe some people say under 9, depends on which figures you're looking at. But the one I focus on is participation, right? So we get a 50% participation rate, and then there's even a smaller percentage of that 50% that actually have to take up office and do things from an administrative perspective, which every organisation is suffering. So in terms of the smaller numbers you've got, are you getting a high participation rate, or are you experiencing similar problems?
Similar, but I think our participation rate would be a bit high, otherwise we wouldn't be able to function. We did have quite a bit of attrition of membership due to financial reasons, due to distance, due to age in the last couple of years. I would say that out of the 60 to 70, at least 50 would be active members. A lot of them doing multiple roles, like myself. We can be secretaries in 3 lodges at the moment, depending on what we're... because of the fact that it is difficult for people to balance work life and this journey and meetings. Yes?
Just a question for you, Anney. What would be the percentage of men in our order? Would you have an idea of...
They're very low at the moment. I know in Victoria, Daylesford has a high number of males compared to the Victorian lodges. My Victorian lodge that I'm a member of, there's only 1 male member.
In St John's we have 4.
Yes. 4 males, so it's overwhelmingly a female organisation in that respect, yes. In terms of the actual demographic of membership, not saying your values or anything like that, but you have a lot of female participation.
It's a high number of female participation, but the males are growing.
So you're finding there's more people coming
in.
Now, are we talking people that are disaffected with the current institutional structure, or are we talking new people off the street?
New people off the street.
Coming straight to you guys.
That's
guys. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Okay, and so you said you're a member of Victorian Lodge, and you're the secretary there, is that right?
I'm not the secretary at the moment. I am the National Council Secretary. Okay. The Federation has a National Council that assists the leader of the Federation, our most puissant Grand Commander, in administrating the Federation. So I'm the secretary that's responsible for the administration.
So you went to a meeting one day, gave someone eye contact, and next thing you know, National Secretary. Well done. Congratulations.
It happens like that.
It does happen like that. And you're a past Worshipful Master, or your current Worshipful Master?
I'm the current Right Worshipful Master of St John's Lodge.
Yes.
Also the president of the Property Association, a similar situation. I did not look away at the
You made eye
right
contact.
Yeah. And also the editor of our Federation newsletter. So.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've got a few hats. And
a few hats.
That's really good. Well, I think our listeners have been probably enlightened about some of the organisational structure. One thing we do need to tackle, because this is something a lot of young Masons who are joining Freemasons Victoria are sort of thinking about. They don't just join for the 3 craft degrees anymore. They're well researched and they've got a plan. For our order, it's a lot of people say, yes, I want to become a Knights Templar. That's their York Rite journey. They want to get to that point. And for obvious reasons, the ritual is fantastic for what I'm told. So what degrees do you confer? And obviously very different to what we do, just so you know, and our listeners are aware, in Victoria, the United Grand Lodge of Victoria does the 3 craft degrees. If you want to join the chapter, you join the Supreme Grand Chapter, which is a different grand body and administers 2 degrees. If you want to join the Mark, there's a different grand body again, different secretariat, administers the Royal Arch Mariner degree and the Mark Master Masons degree. And it's the same as you go on. Royal and Select have their own Grand Council, all the rest of it. So it's very fragmented in that respect. But you guys are a bit more streamlined, aren't you, in your approach?
We are a bit more streamlined. And while I'm the Secretary of the National Council, it really predominantly looks after the craft degrees. It does cross over into the other side degrees. Like the Grand Lodge, we have the 1st, 2nd and 3rd degree, the 3 craft degrees, which are you have to go through the ritual. We used to have a Mark Lodge. Due to poor membership, it had to be closed.
That's a shame, yeah.
So now that degree is conferred for those members that want to join the chapter, the Holy Royal Arch.
Yes.
And then the next degree, after you've gone through the chair and you've been through the Worshipful Master's chair, you have the right to apply for the 18th degree. Yep. So the previous degrees from the 4th to the 17th are conferred, and the 18th you're brought in.
Yep.
And again, to go any higher, you have to have some history of participation and active membership and contribution to the order to be recommended for the 30th and any of the higher degrees.
Interesting. So that's an interesting requirement. I think in Victoria of the Scottish Rite, there's 2 constitutions. Obviously, you've got the Australian Rite and the Scottish Rite, and they have a situation in the Australian Rite where if you're a member for 5 years, I believe, of the 18th, you get offered a chance to go up to the 30th, and if you say no, you get thrown to the bottom of the pile. But it's interesting that you have that merits-based system, and it's so. In terms of this is one thing that I've noticed, at least in my Masonic journey. I'm affiliated more with the York Rite tradition. I like those degrees. I want to finish that legend, the Hiram legend. I want to finish that story. But obviously there's a bit of a merging in your order. So would you say, obviously, you're more Scottish Rite focused, or is the York Rite less significant? Or?
According to the international constitution that the Supreme Council administers, the Scottish Rite is the most prominent. Yes. According to that structure. But each Orient or each federation has a right to use whatever ritual or do what they like so if they want to do the side degrees and really go for it. So the Australian Federation is very, very always has been very structured in that way to have members do both. Although it's not a requirement anymore that they do both.
Okay, so it's optional.
It used to be. The regulations have changed in the last few years. There was that restriction that if you didn't go through your Mark and your chapter, you couldn't do your 18th. Yeah. And there had to be some sort of... it's very difficult for members to do all of them. So there had to be some sort of compromise there in that.
But just to confirm, you're both members of the chapter, for example?
Correct, yes.
And you're both were members of the Mark, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Yeah. And so how does that work? Do you meet as a separate lodge, or...
It's a separate lodge.
So what would be the name of would be Victoria chapter, or...
Rose of Sharon for the chapter.
Oh, okay. It's the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem, Rose of Sharon.
Oh, yes. So beautiful. So you got different... It's good. I like that.
That's the chapter, and the Mark Lodge was Golden Rule Mark Lodge.
Okay, yeah. I'm sure you enjoyed those, because in Victoria, Article 2 of our Constitution says that there are 5 degrees in Freemasonry, right? The Mark, the chapter, and the 3 craft degrees. I'm a big subscriber of these alternatives. I think that they complete at least a large part of that journey. And then if you add the Cryptic Council on top, it just bridges that gap between the Mark and the chapter. But it's fascinating to see that you guys do... It emphasise the same thing. So that's good. Our listeners, I think, James, have got a good idea about the structure. What we're going to do is we're going to ask Anney and Alan some questions about this issue of the white elephant in the room, the big elephant in the room. What is the issue with women in Freemasonry? We're going to get your views first. We want to hear your arguments and perspective, right? And I know you're very passionate about this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm going to put forward some ideas that traditionalists have argued would be the reason why Freemasons Victoria, or traditional sort of recognised, United Grand Lodge of England recognised bodies, would pursue to be the correct ancient landmarks of Freemasonry. So tell us, I know that the whole organisation that you, based on the French Revolution principles of equality, fraternity, liberty, these ideas. Tell us more about why you fundamentally believe that women should be allowed to practice, or should be inherently part of the journey of Freemasonry.
From my brief understanding of history, in regards to mystery schools, which I still regard Freemasonry as a mystery school, women were always part of the mystery schools if they qualified. In regards to the main phrase, especially during obligations of the perfecting of humanity, women are part of humanity, so you can't perfect half of humanity without including the other.
Maybe it's the men that need perfecting. Maybe the women don't need perfecting.
I've heard some guys say this is a good chance to get away from their wives once a month, but that's a different argument, I'm sure.
That's a different argument. Yes. I mean, the tessellated pavement of black and white. I mean, where the world is comprised of those opposites. Then there's the issue of salutations. I mean, I've heard that even within our order and also from members of Grand Lodge in regards to addressing female members as brother and brethren. And for me, it's a language disparity. I mean, I've got a Greek background, and for me, the word for brotherhood has no female-male linkage. It's a general term in Greek. In English, unfortunately, it has that male-female, I suppose, label. And so it does confuse people as to how can we call a woman brother. And even some female members still like to be called brother, and I can understand why from a spiritual perspective. Yeah. It's a neutral phrase, and then we have those that prefer to be called sister. So.
Yeah. I mean, I saw an interview that another group in the United States called the Masonic Roundtable did an interview with I think it was a co-masonry body over there, and she insisted on being called brother. And the reason for that, she said, is because the word is symbolic. It's not a literal thing. But Alan, tell me, you're a male in an order that's clearly dominated by females.
I am, yes.
Which is a blessing or a curse, I'm not sure. But in terms of what's your perspective about this, how do you feel? I mean, from coming from a regular Grand Lodge as such, coming into an institution full of which looks at that as sort of ancient landmarks and decides maybe they're not more relevant in the 21st century. Okay. How do you feel about it?
Well, following on from what Anney said about the tessellated pavement, the Mosaic Pavement of black and white, the yin and the yang of the universe. When we enter Freemasonry, we walk between the two pillars. And they represent the masculine and the feminine. And as I sit here, I look across the room and see the level. The working tool, one of the working tools of the second degree, and that teaches us equality. How can we be equal with half of humanity and not with the other half? And I find that sort of being in a lodge with men and women, it sort of addresses this level of helping me to achieve balance of the masculine and feminine within myself, and sort of finding this balance, finding harmony. And there's the potential there in an order that has men and women to find that balance. Yes, we tend to have more women in Australia, but then Grand Lodge has all men. So we have the potential for balance, and I like that.
Okay, so it sounds like the arguments that you'd lodge, or at least the principles you hold, is fundamentally drawn from this concept of equality, natural equality, and also, from what I can understand, it looks like a different view of history. You're talking about the ancient mystery schools and saying that they obviously had men and women, and obviously embracing that, and also balance in life.
Yes, I also want to say that the story of Freemasonry is a universal story of we're born into this world helpless. We grow up, we learn, we find enlightenment, we share our knowledge, and we die. That story is not limited to half of humanity. So
okay, yeah. And Anney?
I just want to bring up the principle of having no dogma. Freemasonry for me is order where you have that freedom of opinion and freedom of views and freedom of expression and freedom of beliefs. And that should also include freedom of whether you're male or female as well.
Yes, I understand, and that's a fair point, I think. Freemasonry was created in a period where it was a radical concept, a very enlightening concept, and this is something that our listeners have been sort of exposed to. Where does it come from? No one really knows. I mean, there's so many different influences, and anyone who pretends to know, I think, is just being disingenuous. We have an idea, because I think the history of the organisation goes beyond the written document, so it's impossible to trace these things. But we know that it has some influence from the mystery schools, has some influence from other orders that have existed over time. What I want to do now is, I think you've put your views very eloquently. I'm going to put some contrary views to you now, and I'll try and explain the rationale behind it, and then we'll get your responses, because I think that this is the interesting part. People who are not Freemasons or members of the United Grand Lodge Victoria are going to be wanting to ask these questions. So we'll see. We go, James, jump in if you want to ask a question, all right? Because James is a newly initiated brother. He joined in February. So I'm sure from his perspective, having been told in the first degree that we don't admit women and that our organisation swore an obligation not to reveal the secrets to those in which are profane, it'll be interesting to hear your views on it as well.
Well, by the sounds of it, you're not actually opposed to men having a brotherhood. You think that Freemasonry or the teachings of Freemasonry is good for humans in general?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's great. But like what I was thinking, so was it the stonemasons a couple of thousand years ago? So that's probably a lot of the teachings are from the stonemasons, which goes back to when you said before that we're all pillars that need to be. So what was it? We're all pillars that need to be smoothed over.
Rough ashlar, smooth ashlar.
Rough ashlar, smooth over. Which is another good example of that. And I suppose back then, stonemasonry would have been a male-dominated craft.
Yeah, that's something we'll put to you. Yeah, I think that's interesting.
In today's day and age, when I've spoken to a lot of senior members, they say, well, how many members are actually stonemasons these days? There's probably not that many that are actually stonemasons. So they say no matter what your job is, you can put those teachings into your daily life, no matter what trade you come from. Which I guess you're saying can go just as well for women. Yeah.
Well, because those references to masonry, to the stonemasons, the tools and the metaphors are exactly that. They are metaphors.
Yeah. It's an allegorical contemplation.
Because we're not operative masons, we're speculative masons.
That's very interesting. We'll build on that. I think that the main points I wanted to sort of argue, which I think are not really focused on the ritual, I'm talking more about the practical significance of all male organisations. And I want to put this to you in terms of a practical view, because we can get into discussions about what our symbolism means and whether it is masculine or feminine, but we could be here all day arguing niche discrepancies. But I want to put this to you. My view is in society, men's health issues are probably not taken very seriously. I think there's a bit of a change coming towards that now. In particular, there's a social dogma towards men needing to not express emotions and all the rest of it. I just put to you, do you concede that there's a benefit to having all male organisations that are able to promote and foster men's health? I mean, I think that's one benefit of United Grand Lodge Victoria at the very least. There's guys who would be, conform to this concept of not expressing emotion, but whereas they get to lodge, they know that they're in an environment where they're around blokes and they do blokey things. I know it's not an eloquent way of putting it, but I just want to get your views on that.
Well, I've got a background in psychology, so I'm well aware of the promotions of men's sheds in the community in trying to address that inequality in men's health, and especially having men be more, I suppose, the issue of men expressing their emotions has been suppressed for many, many years. Personally, I know that they might like being around their own gender to do that, but do they really express their deepest emotions when they come to, say, a meeting? Do they get to do that in this organisation? If they're going to an organisation like Men's Shed, where they have got the counsellors to help guide them to open up and express their emotions, I get those organisations being men only in the beginning. I don't feel that it's women that have suppressed men expressing their emotions, but men themselves. That's my personal view.
I agree with you 100%. There's a cultural stigma, however it came about. It came about from, and I don't know where.
I don't know how helpful it is to have an all-male group in bringing that out in men. Personally, I think women who are more volatile emotionally can actually teach men a lot more about expressing their emotions. If Grand Lodge could see the way that women do have a positive and a very valuable contribution to make, not only to humanity but to Freemasonry across the world, then I think that my personal view is that Grand Lodge should consider the possibility that women should become members.
I guess this feeds into one of the questions I want to ask about in defence of fraternity, and obviously jump in, Alan, if you've got a view on this as well. One of the things that I think I want to sort of put to you is, I'll get you to answer the question, then I'll put to you a different view depending on what your answer is. Do you believe that the structure of Freemasons Victoria and other bodies like Freemasons is discriminatory?
Well,
I cannot say that I know the structure of Freemasons Victoria, really.
Yeah.
I suppose the Grand Lodge that only allows men to join, in a sense, is discriminatory. But I do appreciate, like being a man, that I do appreciate that there are some men who want that place of belonging with other men.
Yeah.
Whether it's a football club or a Masonic lodge, or a men's shed. But personally, I don't see that's what Freemasonry is about in the grander scheme of things. I think it's about teaching us to be better people.
Your view on that?
Well, you spoke earlier of the traditions of Freemasonry coming from the stonemasonry, where it was male-dominated profession. And a lot of the professions have been male-dominated over the years. And it's coming to a time where even governments are recognising that the balance of male-female in their structures is causing concern. It's not assisting progress. So it just depends on what Grand Lodge sees as progress in Freemasonry. If they're looking at from a if they're wanting to be progressive and coming with the times, I know that traditionally the males were dominant, but it's coming to a time where women are coming into their own. They have a valuable contribution, and if progress and evolution, if we're really tapped into that, then I feel that it should be an equal playing field.
Okay, so the next question that comes from that is, so I think we've got a feeling that it is discriminatory, all right? So is discrimination in this respect unethical or un-Masonic in your view?
I would say it is un-Masonic. You're not being on the level with half of humanity in that regard. You're actually saying the level is tipped and I'm going to treat this group of people this way and these other people this way.
Okay. Yep. And Anney, similar view or a different view?
Similar view. It's I wouldn't call it unethical. Well, from a government perspective, it probably is, because with anti-discrimination laws being passed. But I don't know how that applies to the Grand Lodge. Yeah. But from a Masonic point of view, definitely.
Okay, that's very, very interesting.
Well, what if Grand Lodge recognised a female-only Freemasonry? So you'd still learn all the teachings that male would, or what men would, but it'd be female-only. And the reason I say that, what made me actually think of that, say for football, for example, like the AFL. Yeah. So they didn't mix the women in with the football, but with AFL, they created a women's AFL, especially for women, which is kicking off and it's going to be huge soon.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point.
That's a good question. And in Britain, there is women-only Freemasonry.
Yes.
So that's women just meeting in lodge with no men, and that's a very good question actually. But on that, I sit in lodge with brothers and sisters, and if we wanted to visit another lodge, if there was women-only Freemasonry, my sisters would be able to visit that lodge, but I wouldn't. And it could be because we could be visiting because we've got a mutual friend who's joining, and I would not be allowed to be part of that. Likewise, at the moment with Grand Lodge, well, I can't visit as well, actually, so that would be really nice.
Yeah.
But if I could visit, and maybe my sisters would not be allowed to visit.
Yeah. From that perspective, I don't agree with female-only Freemasons, personally. I wouldn't have joined an order that was female-only.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because when you look at the order in general and the principles that it espouses, it wouldn't be for me congruent to do that. Yeah. And not that I'm judging the female-only order. It's their prerogative to do that. But from a perspective of personal growth and spiritual growth, if you're going to espouse the principles that are in Freemasonry, for me it is male and female.
Yeah.
With regards to football teams, it's not a spiritual journey, it's a physical one, and I'm assuming...
But no matter what, genes are going to say women and men think differently, just like our bodies think differently in a physical way. We're mentally different.
Are we?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Let's build on this concept. So I've set you up for two questions because I wanted to get a feel for where you're at. So just to recap for our listeners, the consensus is that Freemasonry, in its United Grand Lodge sense, is discriminatory, and that the extension to that is unmasonic, right? So that's the contention. So I'm going to obviously put some arguments against that.
Say your mum and your dad, they're both two different connections you have, and that's because of genes. That's because of genetics.
I agree with
your
you.
mum and your dad. That's no
you
matter.
You understand the difference between So you're contending there's a difference between men and women, which is understandable.
I'm sort of just defending the football thing, like, because you're saying it's physical, which I understand definitely. Like, it wouldn't be fair at all. Like, that's why we don't in the Olympics for women's, men's. But I think, like before you said in lodge, how deep do people speak about their feelings and stuff? But it's not always about that. Like today, I've recently started a new job, and it's been hard settling in, and I had Brother Steve call me and just check up with me, make sure everything's going well. Do you know what I mean? So that's reassuring to know I have somebody like that. Do you know what I mean?
But the question is whether or not could that be someone who's male or female. That's the question.
Then I think there's the different connection again with your mum and your dad. You go to your mum and your dad for different things, different questions, different advice.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
And that's a good thing. And I agree with you, men and women do think differently, and we need that broad way of thinking to move forward.
Yeah.
We need to have those differences of opinion and those differences of views and the different way of behaving. You need to have that balance.
Yeah. So your contention would be that by having women and men in lodge, you have the capacity to access two different streams of thought, which is a very strong argument. The argument I'm going to put is in building on the concept of sport groups, for example. I mean, I'd argue that it is a physical difference, but probably spiritual. I mean, a lot of these sports people go through a profound spiritual journey when they go through their activities. I know people who have participated in all sorts of sports and found, just using this as an example, I agree with you that our principles could be open to anyone in humanity. In fact, we are taught to love all humanity, right? We are taught this. This is a very important principle. I just put to you that when it comes to the concept of fraternity, I don't see it as unmasonic. I see it rather as a practical organisational structure that exists for a certain purpose. There's nothing, in my view, there's nothing unmasonic about deciding to have a group of men meet and to have certain principles, so long as they are taught those fundamental principles like love humanity, treat people equally. We're not taught to treat men equally and women unequally. We're taught to teach, our principles are about equality generally, and all the other rules apply, regular conduct. So I don't see it as unmasonic. I see it maybe as impractical. That's probably how I'd see it. But in saying that, if it was women-only lodges that existed, whether it's administered by a different body or not, I'd just as much say, well, they teach and espouse principles that are relevant, just as relevant as our principles. So that's the only difference of opinion. I guess I'd see it more as an impracticality, maybe, rather than a unmasonic tradition, because ultimately we need to look at it through the prism of organisational structure, because this is what it really comes down to. It's not about our principles, it's about the history of the politics surrounding Grand Lodges and how they've been formed. And I'd say that there's a role in the world for men only, female only, and co. I'd say that there's a relevant role for all those organisations.
And I would agree that there probably is a relevant role for all those organisations. I'm always going to go back to the principles in Freemasonry and the secrets, because a lot of it has to do with, and this is what I've heard, and we can't let women know the secrets that we teach in our Masonic.
Yeah, we do an obligation not to tell those who are uninitiated. So if male or female. So equally, my brother
the same as in
would be the same. Which I want to ask you a question about that later, actually, about how that sits with you guys in terms of the obligation side of things. But so we agree that there maybe is a role for all male or female. Yeah. Because I don't see this as sorry, Alan, we'll let you jump in a sec, but I just don't see this as an issue of what the issue is. I think is the way we treat each other. Right? Yes. I think that's the issue. Yeah. Sorry, Alan, jump in.
No, I was just going to agree with you.
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, good. I like this. Yeah.
Ideally, would you like, say, Grand Lodge made a women's only, a males only, and a co one together, all under the one body though? Would you
I don't think I've thought about it that far. I think what we have thought about is maybe just to have some sort of recognition and reciprocal visitation rights at this point. Yeah. I don't know where Grand Lodge sits on this, but from my perspective, they've got a long way to go before women become members.
Let me just say this though, Jane. the views here expressed are all the views of the participants.
Yes.
We don't represent any I don't represent any Grand Lodge body. I'm going to say that our friends here from the Droit Humain don't represent any Grand Lodge views or opinions. So anything we say is the views of the participants. But I think what you're saying and what you're saying, Anney, is...
I was just thinking, it's hypothetical. If that happened, like, would that be something you'd be happy with? Would you join then?
Yeah. Sorry,
I think reciprocal visitation rights would be a wonderful thing. Jack, you know the story that I told you about a friend of mine who joined his father's lodge, and I attended his initiation.
That's the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, yep.
Yes, in the United Grand Lodge of Victoria.
Yep.
I attended his initiation because at that time I was still a member in good standing with my lodge in Sydney, in the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales. But his second degree and his third degree I could not attend because by then I had affiliated with the Droit Humain. And so that would have been lovely to have seen him go through the 3 degrees. So I think reciprocal visitation rights. Also, for your members, if you want to visit us, you are welcome to visit us, I should say. But, if you choose to, it would be lovely if you weren't wrapped over the knuckles for doing that.
So I think the issue in contention here, and what we're going to do now, is we're going to get into the discussion about maybe some practical changes that could be proposed, because I think we've headed naturally in that direction. But one of the things I think our listeners need to be aware of, at the moment, it appears from any reading of the ritual of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria or any United Grand Lodge of England recognised body, the argument in the ritual or the insinuation is that our version of Freemasonry, our version of the secrets and obligation is superior to and exclusive from, which, from what I'm feeling, it isn't the view of your organisation. You don't claim a monopoly over Freemasonry, is that correct?
Definitely not. It goes against our principle of having no dogma associated with our teachings. We don't claim to have superior... I mean, all different lodges in different federations work different rituals. And as long as they're approved by the Supreme Council in France, they're approved rituals, there's no one claiming superiority over the other. Yeah.
So for the listeners who happen to be members of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, I think I have a duty to ensure that you understand what it means to have done the obligation in our degrees and what it means if they were to consider visiting. I have to be careful and ensure that you guys know what happens. Basically, when we do our obligation, we confirm that we will not reveal the secrets of the degrees, the secrets only, right? Let me speak very clear. It's confined to the secrets, which only makes up about 1% of our ritual, mind you, to anyone in the world who is not an initiated person. Now, by consequence of the fact that we don't allow women in the order, it automatically means any woman, but in saying that, any man who participates in rites that are not recognised or respecting those rules. So, by de facto, Alan, like you're saying, you participate in what we would consider to be an irregular body.
Correct.
And therefore, because of your participation, regardless of your merit, your association, you're automatically excluded from our capacity to reveal secrets.
I just wanted to say that we have that same obligation.
Same obligation, yeah. But you would consider us part of that non-profane world, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
We recognise you as Freemasons.
Yes, you recognise. That's the difference. So, and I think that the issue here is that, just so listeners know, if you were to attend a lodge meeting, say, a body that's not recognised by United Grand Lodge of Victoria, clearly as a part of participating in that meeting, you do signs and tokens, and you have to participate in that way. And by virtue of doing that conduct, you break your obligation, and therefore you are up for consequences, right? So that's just so our listeners know, right? People do visit, I'm assuming, at your lodges?
Some have visited. We have had quite a few visitors from your order.
Yep.
Some have come with the permission of your Grand Master.
Yep.
I think that's the title.
Yep.
To visit. They've had permission to visit as part of research, the Lodge of Research. Would that be right, Alan?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So there's been obviously a goodwill already extended in that. All right. Well, just so our listeners know, that's what happens. I'm sure that your order would be more than accommodating of the visitors, but just be wary of your obligation and don't get yourself in trouble if you can avoid it. But there are ways around doing things, obviously. And if the Grand Lodge of Victoria has shown a willingness to allow research and visitation rights for that purpose, maybe there's a dialogue to be had there.
And that's wonderful.
Which is good. Yeah. Let's get into some of I want to talk about practicality. So let's go right from the unimaginable, the stuff that would piss off the United Grand Lodge of England, right through to something that maybe is a bit more possible. So, women in United Grand Lodge of Victoria, I think we had a brief discussion of that before. Probably not going to happen, but is that something you'd like to see, or are you just apathetic about that idea?
Well, I think we'd like to see that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're both members of an order that does have men and women, so we would like to see that in other orders.
So that's something you'd actively like to see happen? Yep, okay. All right, so that's fine, and we've got a good view on that. Now, the next step is, assuming that never happens, because the United Grand Lodge of England says, no, you do that, we're going to put you into the basket case of irregular lodges, which is what generally tends to happen. What's the next one? Mutual recognition. So that would be United Grand Lodge of Victoria saying, yes, we recognise you, you recognise us, and then it comes down to the question of visitation. But firstly, that's something you'd like to see happen, is that right?
Definitely. Yes.
Definitely.
We did have several years ago, one of our members' husband, who was a member of Grand Lodge, I don't know if he still is, one of the Greek lodge, it's Gregorian Lodge.
Yep.
They had an open installation, I think that's what they called it,
yes.
where the women were allowed. Obviously, the master was installed, and then there was an
open investiture of officers.
Officers. So that was a nice thing to have been invited to and to have participated in. And there was a lot of members from Grand Lodge giving some instruction in the Lodge of Instruction room and answering questions about their order.
But obviously you didn't attend in regalia, for example, which said this is the sort of thing that recognition would allow, yes? Yeah.
That was the only... I mean, it was good to see a little bit of openness and a little bit of softening there.
Yeah.
But it didn't go to all the way.
Yeah. So you'd like to be able to attend even an open investiture in regalia?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so say that mutual recognition is off the table in terms of they can't recognise you because UGLE says, no, you do that, you're in trouble, despite all the goodwill. Let's go to the next logical step. So mutual visitation rights are probably out the window for women in that respect. So that what would your view be about, say, Alan, we say to you, look, we know you're a member of this other order we don't recognise, but you can come visit us because you're a male and you practice the same rights and secrets as us. Would that be something that you'd be comfortable with, or would you object to that on principle grounds?
Personally, I would really enjoy that, and I think that could be a first step. I would feel sad for my female brothers that could not be with me in that it's only a welcome that's offered to me, but I would enjoy that. Yes. Yeah.
So, and would you have an objection to the male brethren in your lodge going off and visiting an order that probably espouses the views that
if they've got permission from our the head office, which I'm assuming they would. We allow your members to visit, so I don't see why they wouldn't have allowed our male members. But if that's a start to bridging the relationship,
you'd personally be comfortable with that.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just, it seems like, and I know this is all our personal views, it just seems like that would put the moral onus on you guys, because you'd be saying, as you're saying before, it's discriminatory, it's un-Masonic, you can now attend this discriminatory and un-Masonic body. You know what I mean? You get what I'm saying there? So it's a tough one on both sides. So it's not just the United Grand Lodge of Victoria that would have issues here, I think.
Well, having come from the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales into Le Droit Humain, I know that the secrets are the same.
Yes, but the issue would be, would your sisters be happy with you going and participating in this un-Masonic discriminatory organisation? That's the question, I suppose.
Yes, because we've actually said that that it is a little bit discriminatory and un-Masonic.
Yes, so that's just an issue I'd see that would arise. Not saying
can see that too.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I want our listeners to know it's not all UGLV, right? I mentioned United Grand Lodge of England for a reason, right? We are bound to follow their instructions. They are the first Grand Lodge. So anything we do has to be in light of that. There are Grand Lodge bodies around the world who are in fear of being not recognised, because there's the esteem and all sorts of things that come with that. So I just want to make the point, there's moral issues on both sides. Yep. Next one. So let's say that falls through the floor. No recognition. We say no. Clandestine, irregular.
We already have that.
It's current situation. Yep. But we say, look, Brother Jack, go visit Victoria Lodge. We're not going to care. It's a technical breach of your obligation, but we recognise they're practising basically the same principles and secrets as us. Just keep it quiet, do your own thing. UGLE will never find out. That sort of... I'd say it's a status quo, but I'm not too confident that it is, right? Because there are reprimands that will occur if you do visit, if one of us were to visit your lodge, right? Would that be something that you'd be willing to recognise? Or support, sorry, not recognise.
Yes, well, we would support that, and we do support that.
We already do.
You already do, yes.
Yes, if any of your members did choose to visit us.
Yep.
We have a book that is signed by our members, like you do, your lodge attendance book.
Yep.
And visitors are welcome to sign that, or they're welcome not to sign that.
Yes.
So
it's
they
open.
don't have to record that they have visited.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I mean, I have to not really retract, but really be mindful of our judgment, our moral judgments in regards to Grand Lodge. Because by allowing your members to visit us, what are we saying? We're recognising that they're on equal footing as we are. When we said that it's unmasonic, but so we're actually allowing unmasonic members.
Yeah, this is the thing I want.
This is the labelling.
So
this is the labelling that we have to be careful of.
Yeah.
And
as I hope, just so our listeners know, the idea of this conversation, we haven't briefed anyone. I've only come up with the questions 3:00 yesterday morning, and the idea is to develop a conversation that's going to be developing our views, right? So our views are changing and developing, and we're recognising some of the stigma that's out there. And this is something I want to put to you both, because this is an argument I find quite interesting. Is it really Masonic to allow someone like me, who's willing to break my obligation, say, theoretically, I've made an obligation, I said I will not do this, I attend your lodge, I'm breaking that solemn obligation. What does that say about my character? Does that say I'm someone worth letting into your lodge? How do you deal with that conundrum? That seems like a very big issue on my view as well.
So we don't see it as breaking your obligation, because we actually see you as equals.
Even though I've promised that I would not do this.
You haven't promised. Yeah, but that's
I've promised it. You guys haven't promised. That's fine. I understand. That's fine. If you were to come to us, you wouldn't be breaking anything, right? But for me to go to you, they'd have to physically change the obligation. I would be. We've all done it. You guys as well in a variation. We've sat before our higher power, and we've said, we say that we will not do this and we will do this. Now, you guys have admitted the reference to profane, obviously women and being profane and all the rest of it. We've said quite explicitly, I just wonder if from a conceptual Masonic perspective or ethical perspective, are you fine with people who are breaking their obligation coming into your lodges?
Yes, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and it's a very good question. And what does it say about us to let someone visit who
about
is
the people
breaking
who are
their
visiting
obligation?
Well, what part of the obligation are you breaking? Because from a practical perspective, you know that we have the same secret, so you're not breaking that part of the obligation. The only part of the obligation that I would say is questionable would be an unrecognised order.
Or to the uninitiated world.
Well, we are not uninitiated.
But you're not initiated into our order. So we've said that I'm not saying that you're not initiated. I'm just saying that according to our obligation, we say that you can only be initiated. We agree. It's not like it's forced upon us. We come in. We voluntarily join the organisation. We do an obligation to say, Freemasonry is this, right or wrong. Freemasonry consists of these values, and we will not break these rules, right?
And the rules are that you will not reveal to the uninitiated.
Yes.
And from a practical perspective, you're not really revealing anything to the uninitiated.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, you're not really breaking your obligation.
Yes.
Well, like Freemasonry is not just about secrets, though. It's bigger than that. And so when you say you go to your interview with Grand Lodge Victoria, right? The main thing that they want to know is that you're a person of good character.
Yes.
Okay, and that's probably the biggest thing in Freemasonry. They want to make sure the person who's initiated Freemasonry is of good character.
That's the same with your order, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So if someone's willing to break their obligation that they've made to their brethren, their lodge and Grand Lodge and the higher power, or whoever that may be, that they've already tested their character and it's not very good.
Yeah. Well, that's if you believe the view that they've actually broken their obligation.
Yeah,
from my view, they haven't broken their obligation.
Yeah. That's a good argument. I'm still conflicted on this because I see your point. But go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Yes, I was conflicted when you asked it, but I agree with you, Annie, now, hearing you express it.
Because I know the words, they're in my head, the obligation words are in my head.
Yeah.
And they're quite specific. And if it's to the uninitiated, and from our perspective, you are not, members of the Grand Lodge are initiated.
Yeah. So
I suppose it's how you consolidate that wording in your own mind and your own heart and your own character.
Yeah. It's interesting. Look, I agree with you. I mean, I'm a law student, so I look at the letter of the. It's not only what's said; it's what's implied.
Yes.
And I think that everyone knows, at least from the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, if you do your obligation, you would have been in the same position in New South Wales. When you do your obligation, you know very well what the rules are. You know very well what you're signing up to. I'm not saying that you're doing anything wrong, I'm just being devil's advocate here and saying that I would find that as a member of your organisation something to contemplate, because there is a justification. You're saying, well, we don't see it as a break of your obligation, but it is. And it's a situation where, what does that say about me? I don't know. Like, that'd be a question I'd be asking. So that's good. We discussed that. It's very interesting. So you've put forward a very good response. I'm still on the fence. I'm not sure how I'd feel. Because I'm not worried about me personally. I'd say for your order, wouldn't that bring dishonour on... Wouldn't you be upset about people coming into your lodge room, which for you is...
Definitely.
That are willing to do that? That'd be something I'd be... If you were sitting
the
in the
vow
chair...
and the obligation is very sacred.
Yeah, you'd be sitting there going...
We see that as quite...
important, yeah.
Important.
Exactly right. So there you go. Yeah.
But every person who visits is tested by the junior warden.
Yes.
So to make sure that they know the secrets.
Yes.
And then if they know the secrets, in a sense, who are we to judge what's in their heart?
Yeah,
sure. Like the compasses.
Sure.
You know, sort of, my bounds may not be your bounds. Yeah. And who am I to judge you for visiting? You know.
Yeah, I understand. It's a very controversial idea, and when this question was put to a co-mason in the United States on the Masonic Roundtable, a similar response was given, but I think yours, honestly, more comprehensive. Her response was, well, you know, obligations mean different things to different people, so who am I to judge? Which I think is one of those things, but you've put the point that we have to consider the fact that it may mean different things, but in the letter of how it's written, it is written so you subscribe to that view. It isn't open to interpretation as such, in my view. I think that it's very clear, and your order would have a very clear obligation.
Very clear.
You don't go breaching those rules.
No.
Yeah? So that's very interesting. So we've discussed basically what some of the practical changes we could love to see happen, and I've put to you some stuff, and we've had a very good conversation. Thank you for being open and frank and considering those ideas as well. We've learned a lot out of that. Let's talk about some of the ritual differences. I want to sort of talk about some of the symbolism that comes out of rituals. Obviously, we're not allowed to talk about secrets, but we'll talk about some of the themes and ideas that happen during a ritual ceremony. And for our listeners, you can listen to episodes 4 to 6. We talk about the first, second, and third degree in this way. So hopefully it would be good to hear your view on it. So let's talk about the first degree. In our order, obviously you have a situation where your left breast is laid bare, and we say for a number of reasons, but one of them is to show that you're not an imposter as regards to sex, although I've been told that some people have been quite confused in regards to some of the members that come through. But it is one of those things, isn't it? How do you guys deal with that? You obviously have to adjust that, I'm assuming.
Well, yes. I mean, we don't have the word bare or naked left breast. Mm-hmm. It's just to my left breast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it sort of comes down to what does it mean to be a Freemason? Does your breast have to be naked at your initiation on entry into the lodge to be a Freemason? And if my fear is aroused by something being pointed to my breast, whether it's clothed or naked, I still feel the same fear.
Yep.
That heightened awareness that brings.
Well, the breast is probably the actual word. It's actually the part of the body that covers the heart.
The heart,
yes.
And so it's used as a symbolic reference to where the heart is.
Yes.
So, and in our red rubrics, it does say the left breast is laid bare, even though we don't actually expose it when you know.
Yeah. I think you're right.
It has reference to the heart more than anything else, and it's just the body part that.
I think the imposition of in our ritual, we say, just to see that you're not an imposter as regards to sex. I feel that was an imposition that's been put in there, but the real meaning is that, and I think even the lay bare part, whether you're male or female, the idea behind that is you're willing to be able to expose your bare skin to this risk, because you can easily be stabbed whether you're clothed or not.
I think it's exposing your heart.
Yes,
It's more deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's exposing your heart to this journey.
Yes, exactly right.
For me.
I understand.
That's how I would interpret it. But
I think it's got both those significances. I think it's the significance of being literally willing to show your skin and literally and symbolically being able to bear your heart. So that's interesting. So in terms of those differences. I mean, I think in our second degree and third degree we lay different parts of the body. I think we do this side on one and both of them on the third, so it's just flaps everywhere. In other jurisdictions they don't even do that. In New South Wales, for their second and third degree, they just wear their dinner suit or whatever they wear to lodge. So how do you dress? That'd be an interesting question that some of our...
Well, we do have a gown, or the males wear something else. I think they just take their jacket off, don't they, or they don't need...
No, well, we do wear, for want of a better word, a costume that the initiate, the candidate, wears. When I joined Le Droit Humain, it was also new to me to wear the outfit of the candidate for the 3 degrees. That was not something that I had experienced in New South Wales Grand Lodge. I mean, it's an outfit where one side is bare for 1 degree and likewise the other side for another degree, and that was part of the richness that I experienced in joining Le Droit Humain. There's other richness there too, but probably don't need to elaborate at this point in time.
Yeah, and so for females, they'd wear. You're saying a gown? Is that correct?
It's similar, but it's just a gown. And from an EA perspective, wearing the gown is also symbolic of leaving your, coming into something from the outside, different from the outside world.
Yeah. So you still do the divesting of metallic substances.
That's one of the most important parts.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So that's what it's all about, isn't it? Coming into Freemasonry, poor and penniless. Yes. So the principles are the same, exactly the same. And so would you say that, by the sounds of it, the ritual here in Victoria for your order would be, is it similar to our ritual here? I'm guessing, because do you know if they do the same thing in New South Wales in terms of the...
in New South Wales they use the same ritual as ours. But there's also another, they've got another...
The George Martin ritual.
The George Martin ritual.
Which is a humanist ritual.
Yes.
Le Droit Humain, as an order, internationally, it's primarily a humanist. It works to the progress of humanity.
Yes.
And in our constitution it says... Our lodges work to the progress of humanity or to the glory of a supreme being, or both. Yep. The Australian Federation works to both, so we work to the glory of the supreme being.
So you have a requirement for a supreme being, is that correct? So an atheist can't join your order?
Not in Australia.
Not in Australia. No. Okay. All right. And in terms of, this is interesting, so I want to ask a couple of questions. I know you've got that humanist approach towards the way you view the world, which is perfectly fine. Does that mean that your order is more inherently political, willing to participate in the debates of our time?
I think our order is respectful, and it's part of our obligation to be respectful of the politics and the laws and regulations of each of the land constituted. So,
participation in debates would be frowned upon in Lodge.
We actually don't talk much politics.
No.
I think religion and politics need to be... Well, everyone's entitled to their views, as long as they don't impose on how they work together within the lodge.
We do talk about spirituality and philosophy.
Yep.
But not...
And they're very open as well.
Yes, absolutely. The only thing I'm trying to gauge here is whether or not there's a cultural difference between... Because obviously we have very strict rule, no religion, no politics.
Yes.
But I understand, since your purpose is to advance that humanist approach, clearly that seems inherently... has a capacity. I know in France... With some orders, and not necessarily your order, but other Grand Lodges have been in trouble for getting involved in politics. I think even the regular Grand Lodge there at the moment is in big trouble about this.
Our order doesn't necessarily get involved in politics other than, and I would assume, and I'm making an assumption here, that Grand Lodge, apart from any philanthropic, charitable commitments and engagements, that is something that is highly... encouraged.
Yep.
But politics, I haven't heard of our order really being involved.
So it's similar to ours in that respect.
And it's up to the individual Freemason. Mm-hmm. If you want to stand up for a cause, you're free to do that. But sort of you don't represent your lodge when you do that.
Yes. So you don't mix it with your Freemasonry.
No, and actually, because I actually have to monitor the emails that go through to lodges, and if I'm sent something from a member, for example, that has got a political slant, it's not circulated.
Yeah, it's just the only reason I asked is not to assume that, but it's just it seems the objective is quite substantially different to what the advancement of humanist thinking is very different to what we do. But in that same respect, you don't mix religion and politics with your Freemasonry still. Yeah.
But I would say personally that working to the perfection or the progress of humanity is working to the glory of the Supreme Being.
Oh yes, I think I agree 100%. I think that's something. It's just that is an inherently philosophical, ethical, I'd say political concept. It really is. It would have been radical at the time, and it's probably still, to a large extent, it is.
It is still radical, and even in our lodges on our altar, we have all the volumes of the Sacred Law.
Yeah.
We don't just have the one.
Yeah. Well, I belong to lodges that have multiples as well, but it depends on the makeup of the membership. Yeah. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I definitely think there is room for change. There's room for growth. I think if we don't change and don't move with the times, we stagnate, and I think as a result, our people see both our orders as being irrelevant to the times. And I think, we talk about the ancient landmarks and the ancient landmark that only men can be Freemasons. Well, I think that's a landmark that needs to change, and we need to move with the times so that we can, progress humanity.
Yeah, and I think it's a very valid point in the sense that what you're talking about is another thing we say in the craft. I'm not sure if you guys say it. Is there is no room for innovation in Freemasonry. They say that, and I always take exception to that. There is room for innovation. This podcast is an innovation, right? It's about progressing our orders so it remains relevant. And we've said this 1,000 times in this podcast. We live in a time of extraordinary situation, extraordinary discovery. There's so much positive in the world, yet we have a lot of discrepancies between religions and politics and peoples, and we're living through difficult times. And I think that what you're saying about what your order does and what we do is more relevant than it's ever been. So we must be willing to adapt.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, by developing ourselves through Freemasonry, we do give a positive contribution to humanity outside the lodge. We do the work. We don't just do the work in lodge. The work is done 24/7.
Charity as well.
We do, as much as we can. Well, we've got a charity that our organisation particularly contributes to in
Sierra Leone.
Yeah, I think it's Sierra Leone, and it's managed by members of our order from France who look after young children who are orphans and house them. And so that's a particular charitable thing, as well as our own Australian contributions that we. I know our lodge is the Royal Flying Doctors is more our thing, but rather than saying what we do, my idea was to answer your question in developing ourselves, not just spiritually, but as people, as human beings. Because that's what I see Freemasonry to be. I want to be a better person, and it starts from the inside. It starts from knowing who you are and what you stand for. You inherently become a better human being outside the lodge, and that's the whole point. The whole point is not just to be a Mason in the lodge, but to be outside in the community and to be an exemplar about really the label of being a Mason to the community as a human being.
How many members do you have? It's like 177.
About 150.
And that's over 20 years. Well, why do you think it is that it's not picking up so much?
Well, I have to say, and I was just about to say something about organisations in general, and even organisations that do have such high principles, they can get stuck in their ways. And there was a moment where ours got stuck, I would say, and very restrictive in how they were doing things. And I wouldn't say it came from Paris. I think there was a federation, or maybe it was more localised, where members became very dogmatic in their traditional views on how the order should be managed.
Which is a problem we both share.
And so that's one of the reasons why I think we've had an issue with membership. But that's only a minor issue. I think that's more in management and governance and members really standing up for their rights and looking for progressive ways to get people involved in what we believe in. I think the mainstream internet and people having access to so many different paths of development now, maybe we're not really advertising ourselves in us. We're not really...
It's just going to follow on that.
Yes.
Both orders, we've got a history of being a secret organisation, that we don't advertise ourselves.
Yeah.
But we're not a secret organisation.
No, we shouldn't be, yeah.
No, and so for a long time people did not know that, especially that le Droit Humain existed. And sometimes when women ask a member of Grand Lodge Victoria, can women become Freemasons? And the blanket answer is no. It would be nice if they said, yes, there is this order where you can actually join. So it would be nice to have that mutual recognition to sort of send women who want to become Freemasons to join le Droit Humain.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd even be willing to say to our listeners, if you're a female and you wish to participate in a Masonic organisation, you can join your order, but I'd have to say, just be aware of the fact that it won't be recognised by the reality of the situation. That's why I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and if Grand Lodges want to pick up that, they should, and I don't see any ethical issues with it.
And just to follow on with James' question about having different female-only, male-only I have interviewed several candidates over my years, and there have been some male candidates that I've actually suggested that they would be better off. Because of their views and yes, they came along and I said, well, it would be nice to have you, but personally, you may want to look into this one.
Yeah.
I know this is a weird example, but there's a lot of women-only gyms, and that's purely for the fact that women feel comfortable around other women, when they're exercising, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So do you think that if you had a women-only Freemasonry, would it attract more women? Would it grow faster than it is, you don't think?
No, I don't believe it would.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where all our organisations, whether it be the craft or, in our respect, the organisations, we have the chapter and the marker. I'm on the Futures Committee of the Supreme Grand Chapter here, and we're looking at these very questions. And it comes down to, what can we do to make our organisation more relevant? We have the right principle. We're made up of the right stuff. We're just not, for some reason, resonating. And I think the spiritual journey you're talking about is very, very important. People are less dogmatic. They're less religious. We have to be careful not to tie our organisations to the sinking ship of religion, which is just me being frank. Whether you like it or not, that's just the reality. We need to be willing to say we offer a less dogmatic, a free-thinking approach to how you should live your life, rather than focusing on the afterlife, right? And I think that you guys do that and we do that, so it's similar problems by the sounds of it. Look, I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I just want to say, on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast and all the members of the Blue Lounge Social Club, which is a young Masons club in Victoria, associated with the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, thank you for giving us the opportunity to ask you questions. It's a difficult topic for a lot of people, and you have hopefully provided some light to give them different perspectives. And I'm sure that we'll get you back on the podcast in a future capacity.
Thank you, Jack and James.
Jack and James.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, James.
No problem. Thank you very much. Welcome back from our wonderful interview with Right Worshipful Brother Alan Garner and the illustrious sister Anney Konis, and they belong to the Droit Humain. I keep butchering that name, but it actually means International Order of Freemasonry for Men and Women, which, as we mentioned, is not recognised by the United Grand Lodge of England. But what a fantastic interview that was. And the things I got out of that, James, was that no matter what Grand Lodge we belong to, or what order we profess to claim, or what superiority we seem to pretend to have, the principles of Freemasonry are what's important. Whether you're male or female or whatever it is, it clearly cuts across those gender lines. Things like equality, the capacity to give to charity, mutual dependence, trust. These ideas are universal, and they really opened my mind to that. Not that I think that necessarily that it's right for everyone. I think that there is a role for fraternities like ours, an all-male organisation. I see no issue with that. But what I hope our listeners got out of that conversation is that as we're taught in the first degree, there is no black or white, right? The checkered pavement is not about right and wrong or absolutes. There are grey, and this is one of those areas where there is grey in the sense that women practicing Masonic rituals in their own right isn't necessarily good or bad. It's just one of those things that is good for them and it's relevant. It was very interesting to see that. I could see, even when we were talking to them, some of the stuff we were saying was making them think a little bit about what their positions are and changing, not maybe developing views. So very interesting, and I hope that our listeners enjoyed that. And some of the stuff we're talking about, what possible rooms for change can there be in the relationship between our Grand Lodge and theirs, was very interesting. And we'll just wait and see what happens. There's no right or wrong. I think the current situation is quite sustainable to a large extent. But I hope that you found that at least an intellectually stimulating conversation, Joe.
No, it definitely was. As an entered apprentice, it was pretty interesting to come in, I guess, mainly witness the conversation of people who do have experience with Freemasonry knowledge, do know what they're talking about. It was just good to see their opinion on it, and I suppose I was happy to hear that Anney was able to apply the teachings from Freemasonry that she'd learnt in her that she'd learnt from Freemasonry and apply them to her own life, and it made her happy. So
it's clearly made her a better person, which is basically what we're all about. But
exactly. So
once again, I just want to say thank you to Right Worshipful Brother Alan and Illustrious Sister Anney for coming in and giving us their time. We greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions out there, please send an email to contact@blue.fmvic.com. We'll forward them off to Anney and Alan, but just remember, any response they give it's their personal opinion. It's not representative of the order that they're a member of, but I'm sure they'd be more than happy to assist in any questions about some of their principles and approaches and views that they expressed in our interview. All right, James, well, I think that's been a fantastic episode for the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. Thank you for co-hosting and asking those questions.
No worries, thanks for having me again. Another day in the Brought to Light podcast.
Exactly right, and we'll be back next week with an interview with the immediate past Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria, Most Worshipful Brother Hillel Benedict, who'll be answering questions about his time as Grand Master. And we're not going to just give him easy questions. He's asked us to ask questions on any topic, and we're going to be asking about what his time as Grand Master was like, some stuff about the good stuff he's done as Grand Master, and also some of the stuff that was a bit more contentious, because he had a very big job, and we want to know how that affected him. And also we'll be talking about his religion. He is one of the very few Jewish Grand Masters that we've ever had, and I understand it's a huge achievement, and I'd love to ask how his religion has affected his view of Freemasonry, which is obviously it must overlap. So our listeners can look forward to that. And on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, we hope that you keep safe between now and the next episode, and James and I will speak to you at a future date. Before we end the show, I'd like to provide a quick update on some exciting news that has happened here in the Victorian jurisdiction, which is really relevant to the episode which we record today. As you know, today's episode was about women working the craft. So let's talk about that for a moment. I'm glad to sort of report to you all out there, to our listeners, both in Australia and around the world, that Freemasons Victoria has announced that it is appointing Ms Jane Sydenham-Clarke, the former senior executive in a major corporation here in Victoria, as the new Chief Executive Officer of Freemasons Victoria. The beautiful thing about this is that Jane is a daughter of a Freemason. Her father was a Freemason for a long time. But more importantly, she's coming into office now with an objective to attract younger members and attract the community's attention, which is right in line with what we're trying to do with the Blue Land Social Club and the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. So I'd just like to say, women do have a role to play, even in regular Grand Lodges. Having appointed her as the CEO, the Grand Lodge of Victoria said, "We are not scared of females. Females have a big role to play in Freemasonry. And more importantly, outsiders, people who are not Freemasons, have an important role in shaping our organisation." So to all our overseas listeners, just so you know, the state of Western Australia, Freemasons Western Australia, also has a female Chief Executive Officer. So this makes Jane's appointment as the second female Chief Executive Officer here in Australia, which is exciting news, which I thought we'd add to the end of this episode before we close it up. Once again, thank you for listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and we'll speak to you next week.
You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition. And until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.